Many thanks indeed, Kirsten Webster. This is Newsday with Lawrence Pollard and Shaima Khalil. Let's talk Zimbabwe now. Robert Mugabe is settling in for his 7th term as president. He's been re-inaugurated after the taking over of white-owned farms, a big policy. The next big idea is indigenisation. This is the process whereby foreign firms operating in Zimbabwe have to cede 51% of control to local Zimbabwean groups. Rick Mangwawa is the UK chairman of President Mugabe's ZANU-PF party. He came into the studio a little earlier and shed more light on this policy.
There will be compensation to foreign companies as far as non-mining companies are concerned. When it comes to mines, our contribution is, are the natural resources underneath. But when it comes to all other sectors, we'll buy the shares. The idea is not to make companies some kind of parastatals. The shares are not going to individuals. It has to be groups of people. What we have to manage as a country is perception. Because of the way it's being projected out there, it's not coming across as, a very attractive option. It's very good for investors.
Well, that's Nick Mangwana basically saying indigenisation is going to be good for investors, despite many fears that we've heard from analysts and business people that investment may well dry up as a result of this. Well, Mr Mugabe carried on in his inaugural speech attacking Western nations for refusing to accept the election. Britain said yesterday that the re-election couldn't be considered credible without an independent investigation into the allegations of voting irregularities that we've been covering on this show. So what policy direction is going to take place in the next 5 years? Dr. Tim Murithi joins us now, delighted to say, research fellow at the University of Cape Town, editor of Zimbabwe in Transition, A View from Within. Can we begin, Dr. Murithi, by talking about economics? Last time that ZANU-PF was in charge, there was an economic disaster, ended massive inflation, massive unemployment, ended up having to abandon its own currency, which is still the case. Is it going to be any better this time, do you think?
Well, a lot has changed, in fact, since 2008, the 2008 election, and the economy has actually stabilized quite significantly, in no small part due to the role also played, I think, by this government of national unity that was formed in the previous administration. So I think, the ZANU-PF, the current government now, obviously, would like to ensure such a trajectory of economic growth and development. So it would be tragic for them to shoot themselves in the foot. So I suspect we shall continue to see, inward investment, but obviously, as you've mentioned, along the terms of the principles of indigenization. It's
very interesting you mentioned there shooting in the... How would they shoot themselves in the foot? Would you regard a big emphasis on indigenization as being that, or do you think it's a valid policy?
Not necessarily. Indigenization manifests itself in quite a number of different countries across the world, in different shapes and sizes. I mean, look at Switzerland, one of the most, developed and, if you will, wealthy countries in the world, has a program where, in fact, certain sectors of the economy, what one would describe as strategic sectors of the economy, are in fact essentially owned by Swiss people. You can think of banking. You can think also of the supermarket chains specifically, where the Swiss have a very clear policy of actually controlling, to a large extent, that sector. So it's not a strange concept. It's not something out of the blue.
But it's how it's going to be applied. I mean, it's one thing applying it in Switzerland, another thing applying it in Zimbabwe. Different standards of governance. Most people would agree, wouldn't they?
Most people would agree with that, indeed. So that is the challenge. In fact, based on previous history records, one would be doubtful whether it will be successful. So, in fact, I think it is a wait and see, because this policy has only been rolled out over the last few years. So it is a wait and see. And in fact, whether the internal dynamics within ZANU-PF will bring forth a leadership that will, in fact, actively try to make this policy work for the people of Zimbabwe, not exclusively for the political party, but for the millions of Zimbabweans who would like to see, their country, in fact, move in an upward trajectory and return to its previous heights and beyond, which it's entirely possible if you consider the diamond, and platinum.
And also, let's not forget the enormous economic success and importance of just a few decades ago.
Indeed. One cannot discount that, and the talent and knowledge and education of Zimbabweans is not to be sneezed at, and obviously the conditions have to be right for all Zimbabweans, particularly a substantial number who are in the diaspora in the UK, in South Africa, and other parts of the world, coming back and in fact contributing to this economic growth. At the moment, given the uncertainty over the last election, we can put a question mark as to whether this in fact will be the trajectory going forward. But the ball is in ZANU-PF and the current government's court to see how they will try to build an inclusive society.
Well, many thanks indeed for joining us, Dr. Tim Murithi, fellow at the University of Cape Town, editor of Zimbabwe, A Transition, A View from Within. Now, Shaima has just come back in.